Welcome to this week's edition of Australian Immigration News. Today, we're covering several major developments that could affect skilled migrants, international students, and visa applicants across Australia, including the growing importance of choosing the correct de facto relationship start date, accelerating job losses in the Australian tech sector, state nomination closures, and the continuing financial dependence universities have on international students. Let's begin with the technology sector, because the situation is becoming increasingly serious for IT professionals planning migration pathways to Australia. This week, the Australian Computer Society's publication Information Age reported that more than 4,500 Australian tech workers lost their jobs during the first 3 months of the year alone. Major global companies are continuing large-scale workforce reductions, with Cisco reportedly planning thousands of layoffs worldwide, while other firms are also cutting substantial numbers of positions. And these are no longer just headlines happening overseas. During a recent consultation, one applicant shared that the Australian IT company he worked for reduced its workforce by approximately 60%, and unfortunately, he was among those affected. Why does this matter for migration? Because weakening conditions in the local technology job market can directly affect skilled migration opportunities for IT occupations. If fewer employers are hiring, fewer businesses are likely to sponsor overseas workers under visas like Subclass 482 Skills in Demand Visa, Subclass 186 Employer Nomination Scheme. And at the same time, increased competition inside Australia makes it harder for offshore applicants to stand out.
It also raises serious questions about future invitation rounds for technology occupations under the Subclass 189 Skilled Independent Visa. If unemployment within the local IT sector continues rising, it becomes increasingly unlikely that large-scale 189 invitations for many technology occupations will return in the near future. Now, let's move to state nomination updates. South Australia has officially closed its latest invitation round, while Tasmania is expected to follow very soon. And this highlights another major reality of Australian migration in 2026. State nomination quotas are filling rapidly, and competition is intensifying across almost every pathway. For applicants relying on Subclass 190 or Subclass 491 invitations, timing and strategy are now absolutely critical. Many states are prioritizing onshore applicants, regional workers, healthcare professionals, construction and trade occupations, applicants already contributing to the local workforce. This means applicants can no longer assume state nomination programs will remain open throughout the year. In many cases, quotas are being exhausted far earlier than expected. And finally, despite ongoing political pressure surrounding migration numbers, universities across New South Wales continue generating enormous revenue from international education. International students remain one of Australia's largest export industries, contributing billions of dollars to the economy through tuition fees, housing, transport, and living expenses.
At the same time, however, the government continues tightening student visa integrity measures, increasing scrutiny on genuine student intentions, financial capacity, education provider compliance, and immigration risk profiles. So, while Australia still wants international students, the system is becoming much more selective about who receives approval. And before we finish, let's touch briefly on one issue many partner visa applicants underestimate: choosing the correct start date for a de facto relationship. This is not just a small technical detail. The date you nominate can affect your eligibility timeline, whether you meet the 12-month de facto requirement, the consistency of your evidence, and the credibility of your relationship claims. If your documents, lease agreements, bank statements, travel history, or social evidence contradict the relationship timeline you provide, it can create serious credibility concerns during assessment. And under Australia's faster 2026 processing environment, inconsistencies are being identified much more quickly than before. That's why applicants should always ensure the relationship timeline matches the evidence being submitted. Australia's migration system is changing rapidly, and staying informed has never been more important. Even those currently on 482 visas who anticipate 186 visa sponsorship or who have already lodged their 186 visa applications are expressing concerns about the number of jobs being axed. Yes, it's that time of the financial year when nearly all states and territories have wrapped up or about to wrap up the process of invitations for state sponsorship. On the 3rd of June, Tasmania will close its registration process and issue the final invitation rounds for this financial year on the 4th of June. This is likely to accommodate any last-minute registrations for priority occupations they may be awaiting. South Australia has also issued its last invitation round, but final invitations may still be issued to optimize the use of its remaining nomination places. It was interesting to note that from the total figures of South Australia to date, that ICT professionals were given 243 places, compared to 248 for construction trade workers. I would have thought that given the housing crisis, more emphasis would have been given to trade workers, unless of course they ran out of people to issue them to. Good luck to everyone still waiting for the final round of invitations. Now, with all the discussion lately about caps on international student numbers and tighter student visa policies, many people assumed Australian universities would be facing major financial pressure by now. But according to a recent report published in the Sydney Morning Herald, that is not really what the numbers are showing, at least not in New South Wales. The report revealed that universities across New South Wales are still generating enormous revenue from international education. In fact, the University of Sydney and the University of New South Wales alone reportedly account for around 68% of the 5.1 billion Australian dollars generated from international student income. That is an extraordinary figure, and it highlights just how financially important international students remain to Australia's higher education sector. What makes this even more interesting is that despite ongoing political pressure around migration numbers, housing shortages, and student visa integrity concerns, most institutions reportedly still recorded significant revenue increases compared to the previous year. According to the article, the only major exception mentioned was the University of New England, while many other universities continued performing strongly. And this creates a very important reality applicants should understand. On one hand, Australia is tightening student visa rules, increasing scrutiny on genuine student intentions, financial evidence, and provider compliance. But on the other hand, international education continues to generate billions for the Australian economy. That means Australia is not shutting the door on international students altogether. Instead, the government appears to be moving toward a more selective model, one that still welcomes large numbers of students, but with much tighter controls around who gets approved and which education providers receive priority. As for universities in other Australian states, the full financial picture is still developing, but there will almost certainly be similar analyses emerging soon as more institutions release updated figures and annual reports. Today, we're addressing an important question that many of you have. How do you know when your de facto relationship officially starts? This is crucial, especially for those applying for partner visas or waiting for their own permanent residency to be processed. A mistake in this area can have serious consequences, not only affecting your current application, but potentially leading to the cancellation of your permanent residency, which could also prevent you from sponsoring other family members in the future. So, how do you determine your de facto relationship start date? Well, for married couples, that's pretty straightforward. It's the date they get married. However, for de facto partners, it's not that simple. Having a relationship registry certificate, according to Australian migration law, a de facto partner is someone with whom a person shares a genuine and ongoing relationship built on mutual commitment and a shared life together, to the exclusion of all others. The relationship must show that the couple is either living together or not living separately on a permanent basis. And of course, they must not be related by family. Now, while proving these legal requirements is extremely important for a partner visa application, one of the biggest issues many couples struggle with is identifying the actual start date of the relationship. And surprisingly, this is where a lot of incorrect advice still circulates online. Some people believe a relationship only becomes de facto after living together for 12 months. Others think it only officially starts once the relationship is registered with the state government. But that is not entirely accurate. The 12-month period is generally an eligibility requirement for many partner visa applications, not necessarily the exact date the relationship legally began. A de facto relationship can begin well before registration or before reaching the 12-month mark of living together. What really matters is the point at which both people genuinely considered themselves to be in a committed, shared relationship. That means the relationship start date is usually based on the reality of the relationship itself. When the couple developed mutual commitment, shared responsibilities, emotional partnership, and a genuine intention to build a life together. Only the couple themselves can truly determine when that transition happened. However, whatever date you choose must also be supported consistently by your evidence. That includes things like lease agreements, joint bank accounts, travel records, photos together, messages and communication history, statements from family and friends, shared bills or financial commitments, relationship registration documents if applicable. If the timeline in your application does not align with your evidence, it can create credibility concerns during assessment. That is why choosing the correct de facto date is not just a small detail. It can become one of the most important parts of the entire partner visa application. Doesn't necessarily define when the de facto relationship began, and that date is critical since you'll need to specify it in your application form. So, what should you use as your start date? I frequently tell clients it's not necessarily when you first moved in together or even maybe you have a child together. It's when you realized you were committed to sharing your lives together as if you were married, but you're just not married. Under the law for permanent visas, de facto relationships must exist for at least 12 months before an application is lodged, and having the authorized relationship certificates give an exemption from that 12-month requirement. Now, the Northern Territory and Western Australia still do not have relationship mechanisms to be accepted by the Immigration Department. There are other circumstances which can give rise to an exemption of that 12-month requirement, but they are more complicated exercises.
If you entered into a relationship after applying for a skilled points visa, the date you choose could determine whether your application is granted or refused. Let's take a look at one example. Paul applied for a 189 visa back in May 2025, and the PR was granted in February this year. He is currently in a de facto partnership and wants to sponsor his partner for a spouse visa. However, he has concerns because they moved in together back in December 2025. He is worried that the apartment will view them moving in together as the start of their de facto relationship. If they believe this, they may take steps to cancel his permanent residency, since he indicated he was single in the 189 visa application form, and thus earning the maximum 10 points for being single. This is why the date Jim puts on his spouse application is incredibly important. According to him, he believed his de facto relationship began after his PR was granted. And in Paul's situation, that explanation can be completely valid, because the most important factor is not simply when they moved into the same property, but when both people genuinely believed they had entered into a committed de facto relationship. That distinction matters. Living together may be one piece of evidence, but it does not automatically determine the legal start date of a de facto partnership. Immigration officers assess the broader reality of the relationship, including the couple's own understanding of when the relationship became a genuine shared commitment. And importantly, there is absolutely nothing unusual about couples deciding to formally begin a de facto partnership or even get married shortly after permanent residency is granted. In fact, many couples intentionally wait until visa uncertainty is resolved before making major long-term commitments together. For some people, securing permanent residency first provides stability, financial certainty, and a clearer foundation for planning their future as a couple. That is a completely understandable and very common situation.
The key takeaway here is simple. The start date of a de facto relationship is not automatically determined by a lease agreement, a shared address, or a relationship registration certificate alone.
What matters most is the genuine nature of the relationship, and when both partners mutually considered themselves committed to a shared life together. Of course, whatever date is used in a visa application should still be supported consistently by the available evidence and the overall relationship timeline. Hopefully, this helps clear up some of the confusion surrounding how de facto relationship start dates are assessed under Australian migration law. If you have questions or personal experiences related to partner visas or de facto relationships, feel free to share them in the comments. And stay tuned for more Australian immigration updates and practical migration topics in future videos.